Alrighty. Well, I suppose we'll get started. So welcome everyone tonight, both online and to the Chowchak Museum. Before we get started, I'd like to acknowledge the fact that the University of Sydney campus stands on traditional land that has never been ceded, and that we pay our respects to the owners and custodians of this place that we gather in today. And I extend that acknowledgement to where everyone is zooming in from today online. So tonight, I'm really excited to be able to welcome Donna Storey from the University of Melbourne to talk with us tonight. I first met Donna at a conference earlier this year in which she presented some of this research as a short paper at the Australasian Society of Classical Studies. And as many in the room know, that I am a huge fan of Eurovision, and I was delighted that somebody has decided to tackle the task of trying to understand ancient history and historical representation at this fabulous international event. Donna's actual PhD research is on the reception of classical symbology and fascism, and she looks quite specifically at Rome in both pre-fascist and fascist Italy. And I think that her classical reception take on Eurovision will bring in a lot of what she does as her PhD research, but in a much happier and much more different flavour for this evening. So thank you so much, Donna, for joining us, and take it away.
Awesome, thank you, Candice. You can hear me okay, I assume? Yep,
Yep, we got you.
Screen, and we'll get going. Alrighty, yeah, like I said, thank you very much. And hi everyone, thank you so much for coming along tonight. And just before I get started though, I'm going to give a little shout out to my fellow Victorians. I'm talking to you from Melbourne tonight. And as you probably know, we're in our 4th lockdown. It was meant to end tonight. It's been extended for another week. So please give us a little thought in your hearts and keep us in mind and wish us all the best. Before I start, I will acknowledge the traditional owners of the land from which I am talking tonight, which is the land of the Wurundjeri people. And I pay my respects to their elders and families, past, present, and future. And of course, this is an online webinar, so I also acknowledge and pay respects to the traditional owners of all the lands from which people are listening in from tonight. So as Candice mentioned, this talk is adapted from an earlier and shorter version that I gave at the Australasian Society for Classical Studies, or ASCS, conference earlier this year. And this basically expands on that discussion and continues sort of a broad survey or broad overview of the topic. So, Eurovision. To the utter delight of many fans, of which I have absolutely one, the Eurovision Song Contest returned this year after a 2-year hiatus, having been cancelled in 2020 for the first time in its 65-year history because, of course, of the outbreak of COVID-19, as many things were. The contest this year was held in Rotterdam because the Netherlands had last won in 2019, and the winning country for this year was Italy and the glam rock band Måneskin. With the song Ziti Urbani, and you can see them on the screen there. Måneskin is actually Danish for moonlight, because why not? They were a worthy winner, in my opinion. I really love them and love the song, but, you know, admittedly this year there were so many great acts. It really could have been any one of a dozen or more songs that won, and it still would have been a fantastic result. That was the calibre of acts this year. Except perhaps for the UK, who received 0 points, both from the jury and from the televote, and finished last, as foreshadowed in the Will Ferrell Eurovision movie last year, The Story of Fire Saga. To be fair, I didn't think UK deserved 0 points, but you know, I guess someone actually has to come last. But Eurovision, what is it, for those who might not know that much about it? Well, it is the longest running annual international televised music competition in the world. It was first held in 1956 and every year since, with the exception, of course, last year, as I mentioned. It has the highest televised viewership in the world, an average of 180 million viewers every single year. This year was actually 183 million, so it was up a little bit. That is a massive, massive viewing audience, and particularly if any competing country wants to platform their history or their heritage, or potentially push a specific nationalist view or message about that heritage. It's organised by the European Broadcasting Union, or the EBU, which is a broadcasting alliance of member countries, and all active member countries are invited to compete. And some associated member countries may also be invited to compete, which is how Australia does. We have an associate membership. This excluded the former Eastern Bloc countries until the end of the Cold War in 1991, after which they were then, after the breakup of the USSR, and they were eligible to become members of the EBU. So of course this included like Russia, Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, Ukraine, etc. In fact, the only socialist country allowed EBU membership was Yugoslavia, which entered the competition in 1961, as it had cut ties with the Soviet Union by that stage. Eurovision, in theory, is meant to be non-political, no political messages or politics involved, but this is, of course, impossible when you have countries in competition with each other, and particularly when that competition involves creative components of music and song and dance, and these can all be very national and cultural elements of any country. And when you think Eurovision started in an already divided Europe between East and West, it was already political. You know, Europe isn't one homogenous glob of people. There is great diversity in language and heritage, and politics is fundamental to that existence. So this had me asking myself, given that Eurovision is, of course, political or has some aspects of political, there are varying ways and degrees to which it is political, do some Eurovision performances utilize history, or particularly ancient world themes or the reception thereof, as an opportunity to push a more nationalist or political agenda for that country? Or really, is it just to showcase a strong historical and cultural identity, like a national pride type of context? One of the best known acts from the song competition, without a doubt, is Abba, who won in 1974 with the song Waterloo, and went on to become the biggest pop stars in the world. They probably still are, really. And of course, it was a song about history. It's Waterloo, it's Napoleon. As Napoleon historian Brendan Sims noted, thanks to Abba's lyrics, there is an entire generation of teenagers who knew, even if it was all they knew, that at Waterloo, Napoleon did surrender. It wasn't the only band to sing random songs about historical people or events. Take, for example, this 1979 entry about Genghis Khan, or Genghis Khan in German, from the former West German group, also called Genghis Khan. Now, I have West bracketed there because it was indeed West Germany, or the Federal Republic of Germany officially, but they entered just as Germany because, of course, East Germany wasn't eligible to enter at that point. On a more ancient theme bent, this entry from Belgium in 1981 has singer Emily Starr singing about Samson and suggesting that maybe she could be his Delilah. But returning to this year's winning entry, Italy and the band Måneskin with the song Zitti o Buoni, which means shut up and behave, basically. It's not particularly classical or ancient world or historical in its wording or meaning. It's actually a protest song, sort of about being an individual, you know, don't be a bit different. The performance to me had a very underworld type vibe. The staging was dark, it was a little mysterious. The band is semi-clad in maroon or sort of a dark wine leather, if you like, with strong eye makeup. It had a very sexy, indulgent, and almost debauched kind of feel to it. It's a little bit Fellini-esque, perhaps, like Fellini to Satyricon, or maybe Dionysus in the underworld, or Bacchus more appropriately, given that it's Italy. These are sort of the rock gods reveling in their underworld, and I get the feeling that they're gods who know how to have a good time, much like Bacchus. Certainly lead singer there, Damiano David, gave off some very good times Bacchus vibes at the winners' press conference afterwards. Shout out also to Dustin McKenzie for suggesting that analogy to me. And look, this underworldy vibe wasn't entirely out of place this year in the contest, because there were many songs with a kind of heaven, hell, angel, devil, underworld, afterlife, God's rebirth type of symbolism or analogies or theme to them this year. I mean, not every song, certainly, and there were other themes as well, which I'll get to a little bit later, but certainly enough to be noticeable, such as fellow rockers here from Finland, Blind Channel, with their song Dark Side, again, kind of very moody, dark, underworldy.
Put your man up and you stop, take a shot, your amp and don't stop by. Bring it down like on the dark side.
Blind Channel finished 6th this year, which is the second ever best result for Finland after they won in 2006 with the band Lordi and the song Hard Rock Hallelujah. Again, kind of monsters and underworld, so I don't know, maybe it's just Finland.
God's create some supernatural high.
You may notice perhaps the setting there looks a little bit like a stylized ancient theatre, and you'd be absolutely right, because this is when Greece hosted in 2006, and I'm going to come back to that a little bit later, so just file that away. But back to this year's contest, and Cyprus's Elena Sagarinou fell in love with the devil and was accompanied by devilettes and dancers in her song El Diablo. Again, we're talking with the devil theme here, hell or the underworld, not to mention perhaps a little touch of Lady Gaga and maybe Britney Spears. The Cypriot song caused quite a bit of controversy, however, prompting demonstrations from Cypriot religious conservatives who insisted it was an affront to Cyprus Orthodox faith. The Orthodox Church of Cyprus condemns it as satanic and a brazen invitation to embrace the devil, saying that it mocked Cyprus's moral foundation. And the Church Holy Synod urged the state broadcaster, the Cyprus broadcaster, to replace it with a song that expressed the island's history, culture, traditions, and our claims. Now, both Elena Sagarinou and the Cyprus broadcaster replied it was a misinterpretation of the song. It was actually about an abusive relationship. But I found this quite interesting, an interesting statement and on a political level, like our history, our culture, traditions, and our claims. And it's the claims part that really stands out for me there, which I take as referring to the tension, standoff, if you like, between Cyprus and Northern Cyprus, or as some might say, Turkish-occupied Cyprus. And that's not a conversation I want to get into tonight, but the point here is the statement of wanting that claim, that political claim, a religious one too perhaps, between Cyprus and Northern Cyprus, reflected in the Eurovision entry. And of course, a perfect way to do this is to highlight or show some aspect or reference to Cypriot history, particularly because what I'm looking at, ancient history, to show that, you know, this is us, this is who Cyprus is. We're part of the European tradition, we're not that other group. An example of that is from this 2012 entry, La La Love from Evie Adamu, which has some subtle classics referencing the stone bench on which she stands, could be perhaps a stylized altar, there's a stylized clam behind her. It's a very Venus Aphrodite type setting, which is quite appropriate because Cyprus is one of the locations where Aphrodite was allegedly born or generated from. It's one of her founding myth locations. Shout out also to Mayzab, if she's listening, for suggesting that one to me after my last talk. Cyprus wasn't the only one to use the Venus Aphrodite imagery, not even in that year. Greece also in 2012, you can see in the background there the clam and also a bit of a column there. San Marino in 2014 and the UK in 2017. So if in doubt, Aphrodite it out. But back to this year, and Elena Sagarinou wasn't even the only act to cause a bit of controversy in her home country. Russia's Manizha also had some Russian conservative and nationalist elements in a spin for her feminist anthem, Russian Woman, for which the performance featured strong elements and imagery of Russian heritage. Manizha is a Tajik immigrant in Russia. She moved to Russia when she was 2 years old with her family, escaping the Tajikistan civil war. And there were certainly some quite strong views amongst the conservative elements of Russia that a non-ethnic Russian should not be representing the country, certainly not drawing on Russian heritage and images, and let alone one like Manizha, who is an advocate for the rights of women, for the rights of the LGBTQI community and refugees. In any event, returning back to this year and the heaven and hell theme, not all the songs that carried this theme were as dark as perhaps Italy or Finland. Norway's Fallen Angel by Tix is relatively wholesome in comparison and have that general kitschy vibe that we kind of all know and love Eurovision for, complete with wings, chains, and dancing winged monkey devil things. There were not one but two songs this year, even with the title Amen, the first from Ana Soklic of Slovenia, the second from Vincent Bueno of Austria. Neither made it out of the semi-finals into the grand finale. Austria's song was generally about love or a broken relationship, but Anna's song, Slovenia's song, had a very Christian religious undertone to it, and elements with lyrics about heaven and hallelujah and falling from grace, etc., and that reflected her own Christian background. But the Christian theme really was not quite present with Ukraine, who really brought the pagan gods and renewal forest fairy spring rites to the party with their song Shum about spring renewal and forest gods, and was inspired by the ancient folklore of northern Ukraine. Katerina has this sort of halo held up behind her, and I'll just go to that. With the sun rising. Symbolism, the halo actually derives from pagan civilizations and ancient Asian civilizations, so maybe just ancient civilizations, represents, in general terms, expressions of sort of a general power, divine, but also human. And in this case, I think it was a direct reference to the northern Ukrainian gods or spring gods that this song is about, you know, Ukrainian ancient history. The sun rising behind her, there is spring. Spring is coming. And this year was the first time Ukraine competed entirely in Ukrainian, but it's certainly not the first time the country has drawn on their history and heritage. I'm representing Ukraine in 2004 with the song Wild Dances, and that was the winning entry for that year. And if you thought to yourself, well, that's a little bit Xena warrior princess, well, you'd probably be absolutely right, and I think intentionally so, because what Ruslana was drawing on here for her performance was her Ukrainian heritage, and I think for her, in particular, her Hutul heritage. Represented by this very Amazonian imagery, or at least in the pop culture tradition of Xena warrior princess, combined with the traditional Ukrainian folk music sound. And this is what I think Ruslana and Ukraine wanted to bring, this version of Ukraine's ancient heritage to the world via the Eurovision stage. And 2004 was only about 13 years after the end of the Soviet Union, and only the second time Ukraine had competed. So to go on to win with a song very clearly referencing their own heritage and very much a non-Western one in imagery, like this is not classical tradition, it makes Ruslana's entry quite intriguing. And in my mind, it's kind of a carving out of an independent identity, not only from Western Europe to say, we're not you, but also from the Soviet Union to say, we're also definitely not you, thank you. You know, we are unique, it is our history, our heritage, and it's ours and ours alone. And even the title, Wild Dances, I mean, what are you doing if you're wildly dancing? You're celebrating freedom, it's unbridled joy. You're not feeling oppressed or suppressed by some authoritarian regime. Ukraine has won Eurovision twice. It's the only Eastern European country to do so far. The second winning entry, 1944, sung by Jamala in 2016, also referenced Ukraine history, but in a more modern context. It is about Stalin's deportation of Crimean Tatars in 1944, but the song was performed only 2 years after Russia had annexed Crimea in 2014. So it made the song very geopolitically controversial. Russia was not happy by any means with the song. It said it was a political entry, it should be banned. Ukraine said it was just historical, it wasn't political at all. In any event, the song was allowed through and it won. Though the song has more of a modern historical bent, there are moments reflecting Ukraine's, I think, own folk heritage again, such as the moment I'll play for you in a moment, with Jamala sort of wailing and calling on her ancestors via this sort of tree of life that reaches back to them behind her. And I think it's very effective. Jamala's song isn't even the only time that Ukraine's had a go at Russia. In this seemingly innocent and fun pop bop dancing Lasha Tumbai, in 2007 from Verka Serduchka, one of the lines of the song reads, "I want to see Lasha Tumbai," which when sung sounds a little suspiciously like "I want to see Russia goodbye," at least on one of the repetitions. It's repeated a few times. Something Verka, of course, strongly denies.
I love you. I want to see Russia goodbye. I want to see Russia goodbye. I want to see Russia goodbye. I want to see dancing.
I mean, even the dancing at the end possibly refers back to Ruslana's wild dances, which again, as I said, is expression of freedom, unbridled joy, free from oppression. Returning to history and antiquity, but still with Ukraine, in 2009, Svetlana Lobeda, whose image appeared on the promotion for this talk, featured some dancing Greek soldiers, very scantily clad in silver, and I really do hope that is indeed the way that Greek soldiers danced.
Baby, you're so high. Be my Valentine.
I mean, I say Greek soldiers, perhaps they're Roman, I'm not sure. Someone who's more versed in, military costuming might be able to tell me better. But incidentally, this 2009 contest was held in Moscow because Russia had won the year before. So again, I think this is interesting, just even on another level yet again, despite earlier with Ruslana drawing on the ancient folklore and heritage and sort of perhaps Verka doing that as well. Ukraine here on this occasion is drawing on a reference far more to the ancient classical tradition with the Greek, Roman, whatever they are, soldiers that she's dancing with. So sending a different kind of message to Russia, perhaps. And I know it sounds like I'm having a bit of go at Russia all the time, and I'm not. I really actually quite enjoy a lot of their performances, but this is between Ukraine and Russia. I think there's definitely a little bit of tension, let's say. Anyway, another former Soviet country to call on the classical tradition recently is Azerbaijan, with this entry from last year titled Cleopatra, where singer Effendi calls on Cleopatra, calls on her strength and sexuality to assist her. And the song also includes some Buddhist chants, because why not? And has some Azerbaijani folk sound to it as well.
And it sounds like this. La Cleopatra. La Cleopatra. La Cleopatra.
But of course, the contest was cancelled last year, so Effendi never got to perform her Cleopatra song. But not to worry, she gave Cleopatra another nod in this year's song, Mata Hari, about the former Dutch spy and dancer, and likened her to Cleopatra instead, again including the Buddhist chants and the Azerbaijani folk sound. And there's even a glimpse of an asp in the background, which I'm taking to be the one that allegedly killed Cleopatra.
Story to tell, just like Cleopatra. Yummy of lovers. I started fire. Mama, Mata Hari. Mata Hari.
It's not even the first time that Cleopatra has been referenced in Eurovision. Israel's winning entry in 1998, Diva by Dana International, is an ode to the powerful women of history and mythology, referencing Victoria, the Roman goddess of victory, Aphrodite, or Aphrodite as she pronounces it, and Cleopatra as the queens who look after all women. The Israeli entry caused a bit of a controversy itself at the time because Dana International was a trans woman and the first trans person to win Eurovision. She had to be escorted by security for her safety at the time, and it's kind of almost impossible to think of now, but it was quite groundbreaking at the time. Heritage was evident in Ireland's winning entry in 1996, The Voice, sung by Imar Quinn. The song came at a time when the troubles in Northern Ireland had ramped up again, and it calls on Ireland's own ancient Celtic spirits, and in that way identifies Ireland as a separate cultural entity from what was happening in the north. It's the embodiment of Ireland's ancient Celtic spirits, giving protection both in the past and going into the future, and it's part of Ireland's own national identity.
I am the voice in the wind and the Turkish pain. I am the voice that always is calling you. I am the voice I will remain.
Some of you will recall that Celtic Heritage was very popular in the 90s, and that is thanks in large part to the huge success of Michael Flatley's Riverdance act, Lord of the Dance, which, by the way, got its start at Eurovision as the interval act in Ireland 2 years before that in 1994. So you can thank Eurovision for that particular phenomenon as well. So the traditional indigenous Sami people of the Nordic countries and Russia, Europe's only indigenous peoples, whose culture dates back about 3,500, 4,000 years, have also been represented at Eurovision, firstly with this Norwegian entry, Samid Ednam in 1980. This was the first time Sami culture had been presented to an international audience and featured the traditional Sami yoik by Matti Sieta, which is what he was just singing there, dressed in the traditional Sami costume, the red and the blue. And it was a protest song about Sami rights. It was very radical and controversial at the time, and because the relationship between the Nordic people and the indigenous Sami people was and still is quite complex, and Sami people have been fighting for their rights for a very long time. It wasn't very well received. It came 16th in a field of 19. But fast forward to 2019, however, which was the year of Indigenous languages, and Norway again featured a Sami singer and yoika, Fred Buljo, who's on the right there, in the sort of more stylized version of the Sami costume, traditional dress, I should say, not costume. And Fred is a Sami leader and former member of Sami Parliament, and with the band Kaino here. So just watch the background imagery as Fred yoiks, it's a bit more of a modern yoik, in this part of the song. Love that song. That was really clear Sami symbolism. I'll see if I can just bring up a snap of it there. The symbols themselves, but also the reindeer, because the Sami are the traditional custodians of reindeer in the Nordic countries. And this time Norway actually won the popular vote. It's split between a popular vote and a jury vote. It came 6th overall. And I think this indicates a clear shift in representation and acceptance for Sami people, which is a really positive and excellent thing. Kaino actually competed in the Norwegian national final again this year to again represent Norway. They came runner-up. Tix won, the Fallen Angel guy from earlier. But it's still, even coming runner-up, still shows that there's definitely this improved relationship perhaps with the Sami people, in a Eurovision context at least. Now, I mentioned earlier that when Finland won in 2006, the competition was in Greece. And Greece is a country that definitely embraces its ancient heritage in Eurovision. The 1979 entry here, entitled Socrates, has singer Elpidi singing about Socrates and calls him a superstar. He's the first Christ. He sings about his trial and forced suicide, links Athenian citizens to Pontius Pilate in reference to them doing nothing to prevent Socrates' death. And I'll play a little snippet.
Αγνός και καλός, ο πρώτος Χριστός, Σοκράτη εσύ superstar.
And I don't think you need to be able to understand Greek, and I don't understand Greek, and speak Greek to understand what's going on there, though, like Protos Christos, Socrates superstar. It wasn't even the only song about Socrates. Believe it or not, there's actually been two, and the other one came from Iceland in 1988, titled You and They Are Socrates. An Icelandic singer, Beethoven, of course, sings about his heroes, of which Socrates was number one, and describes him as the Hercules of the soul. It's in Icelandic, of course. But returning back to Greece, the song Witch Prayer, Poia Prasevki, and I apologise to any Greek speakers if I've mispronounced that, sung by Lina Konstantopoulou in 1995. The song is about forgiveness of those who have persecuted her and her country, and the opening lines are in ancient Greek.
Και γάρε βούλοντο μιάνε την γην ταύτην, μη γιγνώσκοντες την ύβριν είναι πίουν.
Shout out to Ko Chongasad, who assisted me with the translation and meaning of that song, which roughly translates as, "For indeed they wanted to defile this land without knowing the violence they were doing." And the quote, he says, doesn't appear to be from any particular ancient literary work, and it's a bit more biblical in context. And of course, in 2006, Greece hosted, as mentioned earlier. This really set a tone. We are Greek. This is our history and culture, without a doubt. The stage, which was probably one of the first dynamic moving stages, or at least the staircases went up and down, in Eurovision, it was really set to look like a Greek theatre, a stylized Greek theatre. The logo, even in the middle there, you can see, is a stylized version of the Phaistos disc. Some of the postcards, which are vignettes that are shown as acts move on and off stage, also highlighted ancient Greece, such as this one. But it was really the interval act which showcased 4,000 years of Greek song, which drew on the ancient themes. And this is showcasing Aristophanes, the frogs and the birds, set to music. And I'll show you a little bit here. A shout out to Ko again for helping identify that. Look, of course, if a country is hosting, it's expected to showcase its history and heritage. There's nothing unusual in that, much like Ireland did with Riverdance when it hosted in 1994 and when countries host the Olympics, for example. But nevertheless, I think this is really Greece clearly saying to the world, to the 180 million plus viewers, don't forget, that this is us, this is our history, and this is how we see ourselves. Even in the more sort of pop style entries, Greek culture is often used as a backdrop, such as this 2011 entry with the stylized columns. Greece's entry this year, Last Dance with Stephania, featured some quite strong classical references in the promotional film clip, which included Atlantis, or at least a sinking city, a flood, Black Pegasus, and a young and handsome Atlas. Fortunately, the stage performance didn't really feature those elements, the classical elements, but she did feature the other strong theme for this year, which was an 80s retro flashback with the very strong pink neon themes. And she wasn't the only one. Denmark also, who didn't qualify from the semi-final, unfortunately. Iceland, last year's hot favourite. Moldova, Poland, and there were others as well. But returning now to Italy, as the winning country this year, Italy will host the song contest next year, and the city yet to be determined. Italy is, of course, a country very obviously rich in classical tradition and also very adept at using ancient world for political propaganda or promotional purposes, as I very well know, given that I study the use of ancient Rome in fascist propaganda. So you might think they'd certainly capitalise on this for Eurovision. Well, yes and no. Italy last hosted the competition in 1991. The opening scene for the night was a video of a song called Celebration, and I have some screenshots there on the screen. It was absolutely dreadful in a very early 90s way, not even dreadful in a kooky Eurovision way, just dreadful, so I'm not going to play it. But you can see in the screenshots with the singer was sort of moving around with this backdrop of ancient ruins and statues and ancient historic sites. And there was clearly a nod from Italy to the Roman past. The whole clip does that. The stage for the contest, which was still a static stage at this point, so there weren't changes around between acts, just looked like a Vegas casino act, to be honest. And it was actually bits of old movie sets, as far as I'm aware, like from Ben-Hur and Cleopatra, because it was broadcast from Cinecittà, which is the Italian movie studios in Rome. And look, to be honest, I really don't think it was Italy's best effort. I'm not sure they were even trying. But I do think that they'll do a lot better and much different next year when they host. Italy didn't even compete in Eurovision between 1997 and 2011. And I think really for Italy, it's the San Remo Music Festival on which the format of Eurovision is based that has been of far more national importance than Eurovision. And that might change next year, obviously, given that Italy won this year, but to date it is it. But nonetheless, Il Volo in 2015 did have a very classically themed background for their performance. However, arguably, Italy's most powerful representation of the ancient world in Eurovision came about almost accidentally last year in 2020. As I said, the contest was cancelled because of the pandemic, but there was a non-competitive televised special where many entrants broadcast their songs from their home countries. And at the time, this is at the start of the pandemic last year, so you may recall seeing images of Italians who were in lockdown, and I was actually there at the time. I got caught in that first Italian lockdown when I was in Rome, and there's videos of Italians on their balconies singing to each other to cheer each other up, because Italy was the first hit really in Europe. It was all quite new and confusing. One of the songs that they were singing to each other was Bella Ciao, and another one was this song, Fare Amore, by Diodato, who, like I say, was meant to represent Italy in Eurovision. So for the televised special that subsequently was held, the non-competitive one, Diodato sings his song in Verona Arena, which is obviously an ancient structure. So you have Diodato singing this song alone in Verona Arena, and it's just this combination of the resilience of Italians during a world crisis, given they'd been singing this song to each other, mixed with the strength of ancient Rome as he's surrounded by the Verona Arena, both sitting within this modern political context of the pandemic. It is almost Mussolini-esque in its sort of structure and execution. So first and foremost, Eurovision is entertainment. There's no doubt about that. It is fun, it is a music contest, it provides something of an escape from the everyday. And frankly, in current times, that kind of escape is kind of a little bit mind and soul saving for a lot of people. But more than that, the contest also provides a small insight into the culture of other countries. And part of that insight is the history and heritage of those countries. The history represented isn't intended to be an accurate portrayal. It's for entertainment. It's not a documentary. So it's sometimes it's more of a general feel to the staging, like the feel I got of the underworld with Måneskin early this year. Sometimes it's a nod to the past in general terms. Sometimes it's quite explicit. But it is, for all intents and purposes, really sort of a form of historical fiction. But can it also be the purpose of political friction? So as I said at the start, it's kind of a broad overview of my question, which was, do some countries use the opportunity of Eurovision to utilise history? And I was looking at ancient history, but even if not specifically stylised as ancient history, then perhaps a reception of ancient history, or at least a nod to it. Is it used to push a more nationalist agenda, or just to showcase national history and identity, like in a national pride type of way? So from what I've looked at so far, in my opinion, I think, yes, in some circumstances, some countries do use the opportunity of Eurovision, not all the time, but sometimes, to push a bit more of a nationalist theme as such. And I would say Ukraine, for me, does at times take that approach on some level, I think, just to take a shot at Russia. but also to sort of show that we are here, we are Ukraine, we are our own culture. And it's something I'd like to dig into just a little bit further and explore that a bit more, and particularly in the Cold War context, actually, both before and after, and dig a little deeper with the ex-Eastern Bloc countries in general. Because prior to the end of the Cold War, the Eastern Bloc had their own contest called Intervision. So I'd really like to see, I think it'd be interesting to see how the competing countries represented themselves in both Intervision and then versus in Eurovision. And I didn't even really get a chance to have a look at the former Yugoslavian republics, former Yugoslavian countries, and to see the same kind of thing. Cyprus, particularly given the comments from the Orthodox Church this year, also possibly could border on that nationalist approach as well, and maybe even Russia. Like I say, it's something I'd really like to investigate a little further and look at the national finals as well, and the media surrounding them at the time. And in terms of a more national pride approach, I think Greece really takes the cake on that one. I think it's more definitely a showcasing of history in a pride type of way, as opposed to nationalist. And I'll be very interested to see what Italy bring up this year. And regarding this year, with the two sort of strong themes that were running through of either 80s or this heaven, hell, underworld, pagan gods type thing, I think this year is just actually unique. Because of where we are in the world. And I think it's just reflective of current world pandemic events rather than anything else. With an 80s throwback, the 80s are often seen as a fun, pink, neon time, happy, clappy time. And it's sort of a bit of an escape from the reality of what we're living in right now, although that's a myth in itself, because the 80s were definitely not a fun time for everybody. And with the underworld afterlife symbology and theme, to be honest, I think it just represents a kind of limbo. Is just where we are right now in this pandemic. We live in a limbo world. We can't move forward or we can't move back. It's between a heaven and hell. It's underworld and afterlife. And I think that just showed up in the staging performance, consciously or not, and in the songs that were with that theme this year. So I'll be really interested to see what Italy brings next year. I think it'll be an absolute extravaganza, to be honest. I think it's going to showcase Italian history to the world in the most spectacular way. That's probably never been done before by Italy in a Eurovision context, certainly. So watch this space. Perhaps I'll be back next year to talk about that. But that's all I have for you tonight. So thank you very much to Dr. Craig Barker and Candice Richards for inviting me to talk tonight, and to the Chak Chau Wing Museum for hosting this event. And thanks to colleagues who suggested some songs or ideas. I've mentioned a few tonight, but a particular shout out as well to Catherine Prouting and Dr. Elena Kozlovsky, who have helped a lot. That's all I have for you tonight. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much, Donna. Thank you. That was superb. Normally at this time of the evening, it's time to announce that the phone lines are open if you'd like to vote for your favourite country. But instead, what I'm going to do is to invite, and I see people are putting messages on chat at the moment, but if anyone does have a question for Donna, could you please ask via the chat function? While people are doing that, I was sitting there thinking, Donna, while you were talking about Italy hosting next year. And of course, the announcement that the Italian authorities were spending 22 million euro to restore the Colosseum for, quote unquote, the gladiators' view of the venue. But I'm wondering if that's done in time for next year. And I don't know if any of us have contacts with the European Broadcasting Corporation, but I would be hosting it in the Colosseum if I was the Italian authorities.
Look, I think it would be spectacular. Also, Verona Arena would be quite spectacular, but there's probably a weather issue involved in that because you can't really cover it. Yes. So, unfortunately, although it would be great, I'm sure there'll be some events held there during the time. It depends where it's going to be hosted, of course.
All right, so we've got one question here, which is, Whoops. How do you interpret Loco from Serbia in the most recent competition?
I think just as a really good time, actually. fun song, crazy. I think people misunderstand the Hurricane, the band from Serbia, and sort of write them off as Barbie dolls, but they're very intelligent. One of the main singers speaks 6 languages, like she's, so that I really enjoyed their performance, but yeah, I think it's just a fun time.
Yes, it's interesting how sometimes the imagery doesn't necessarily match who the competitors are, because I must admit, I was thinking the Real Housewives of Belgrade when I saw them, which says more about me than it does about them. But Destiny's Child, there we go, to the comment from the floor. Okay. So lots of lovely comments coming through from people saying thank you, Donna. Just wanted to ask how much discretion each country's government has in what is depicted relative to the performers themselves.
Oh, thanks. That's a good question. Well, I think as we saw with, well, some countries do a straight selection. Some countries have a national final, and some it's just an automatic pick. So I think with the national final, it's really up to an audience and a jury. When it's a select pick, I don't think the country, in terms of the government, has that much say, and we saw that from Cyprus and Russia, obviously, because they weren't, well, Russia was a national selection. But interestingly on that, Belarus this year was meant to enter the competition, and they had a song that very much, in general terms, supported Lukashenko, the dictator Lukashenko. So they were actually banned from entering because of that. So I guess that was the government trying to influence it in one way, but it wasn't successful.
A question from Simon, only semi-seriously he comments, but after a decade of disastrous entries, will post-Brexit UK try including nationalism in their next entry?
Well, it can't hurt. Tried everything else.
Look, to be honest, I think the UK could have sent the Beatles this year and they wouldn't have got a point. So.
That's true. The UK will come back at some point, I'm sure.
Mark asks, do you think they'll stick with Rome as a location, and do you think Italy can afford it? Also, as part of the Big Five, due to the bargain, is Italy a financial backer of Eurovision?
Yes, they are, and that's part of the, well, they put in one of the largest pots of money, and that's what the Big Five is all about. I'm not sure it will be in Rome. Actually, I think it'll probably might end up being in Turin or somewhere like that. As for Italy, but who knows? It could end up being Naples. As to Italy can afford it, I'm not sure Italy can't afford it at this stage. Italy's taken a huge hit with the pandemic financially in terms of tourist numbers, and it's huge economic hit. So, and something like Eurovision, travel being allowed at that time. I mean, there's 180 million televised viewers, but there's also about 20 or 30,000 people that go to the show and then they stay on and travel in the country afterwards. So it would be a huge economic boost to Italy to have it. So,
are you aware in the 15 years where Italy didn't compete, were they still financially backing it, or had they withdrawn money as well?
No, I don't think they were backing it, but don't quote me on that. I'm not sure. No. I wouldn't imagine so. I think they concentrated on the San Remo festival.
Nina says there was a sublime suggestion possible Kazakhstan entry. Somewhat surprising or not?
I wouldn't be surprised if Kazakhstan has been sort of floated around for a little while now, but there's rumours of it every kind of year or every couple of years, and then it doesn't happen. So I guess you have to watch this space, but I wouldn't be surprised. And I think they'd be great competitors, actually. It'd be quite interesting. They'd bring a good flavour to it.
Oscar raises the point, very interesting how some covert political messages pass through the European Broadcasting Union, but Belarus this year, or Georgia in 2008, 2009, not allowed to compete because of political reasons as well. And that's a very good observation. There is some dichotomy, isn't there?
Yeah, absolutely there is. I mean, it's not sort of black and white. There's definitely some grey around that. As I mentioned earlier, Belarus was sort of banned from the competition because they basically supported Lukashenko in their, and it was overtly political, I suppose. But I kind of would have said Jamala song was a little bit as well. So sometimes I think it depends on the vibe happening in Europe at that time.
Yeah.
People were a bit angry with Russia because of what happened with Crimea, so maybe it sort of slipped through that way, for sure. But it's just, I guess, another circumstance, or can't think of the word right now, but that politics is involved one way or another, you know. Another example.
James asks specifically about Azerbaijan's 2020 song Cleopatra, particularly the lyrics. Cleopatra was not Azerbaijani, but what appeal did the ancient figure of Cleopatra have for the song's lyricist and the singer?
Look, I'm not really sure. I think maybe it's just Azerbaijan saying we're part of the European tradition as well. And it might be that distancing from the former Soviet association as well. Maybe just getting away from Armenia. That's another different discussion to have, indeed. You know, we're a bit different in that, almost in that sort of Cyprus, North Cyprus type way. Obviously different context, but I think just, yeah, we're part of we're part of the European tradition. We belong here as well, I guess.
If Australia wins next year and we host in 2023, do you think we could bring any classical elements in?
Look, I wanted to mention Australia. I didn't. And there was even, I mean, there's lots of songs I could have mentioned and there's only so much time, but a couple of Australia's entrants, Damien particularly and Kate Miller-Heidke, I think did have some classical elements to their entrance, to their performances. Particularly Kate Miller-Heidke was very much a goddess in the clouds and above the world, and with the sort of dark sprites behind her and things like that. So yeah, there's no reason we can't. If Azerbaijan can, I'm sure we can too.
Mark makes the comment that Italy needs Eurovision for the tourism. Me and multiple friends are planning to go. Travel permits, of course.
Yeah.
So let's hope Australia's vaccine rollout increases. Simon raises one of my favourite figures from the history of Eurovision, the Polish milkmaids. Were they perhaps channeling ancient folklore? They were certainly channeling something.
Perhaps their heritage, yes, in some way. I did want to feature Poland actually, but I just didn't really have the time. But some sort of historical nod, costuming, perhaps, yes.
I'm going to ask one final question from Finlay, which is, do you think Eurovision songs are increasingly making political and cultural ripples outside of the Eurovision bubble? For example, Go Away participating with the aim of promoting Ukrainian cultures of the world, and now breaking into global charts with a song in Ukrainian. How much of an impact did their earlier cultural political entries have outside of Europe?
Look, I'm not that familiar with Go A in terms of their broader sort of song collection outside of Europe. But they're certainly having an impact now, I think. And actually that point that they, their song in Ukrainian, I just will add that the top 5 this year, 4 out of the 5 songs in the grand final that finished in the top 5 were not in English. So Italy obviously sang in Italian. Then there was France and Switzerland, who both sang in French. Iceland was in English, and then Ukraine was in Ukrainian. So I think just in that general, not even just Ukraine alone, but general, this diversity of languages is having an impact outside of Eurovision, which is great. And so it should be. Like, it's a really good thing to see. And I think Go A is part of that.
It's certainly interesting with Abba behind you as well, a reminder that you can break outside of the Eurovision bubble.
Yep.
But of course, in the past, it's been within English language. This could be a 21st century phenomenon, couldn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Just to wrap up, Alina reminds us that the Polish song was actually satirical in terms of it's not necessarily the message I got, but but the last note goes to Tegan, who reminds us that if Australia does win, of course, we don't need to invoke Cleopatra or Aphrodite. We have our own local goddess, Kylie.
Of course, absolutely.
Thank you very much, everyone, for wonderful questions and comments. And can I ask everyone in the room and everyone virtually to thank Donna Storey for a wonderful, wonderful evening and 12 points.
12 points.
Thank you, everyone. And for those of you joining us online, if you'd like to join us for future Chow Track Wing Museum events, please check the website. Thank you again, Donna.
Thank you.
Stay safe.
Thanks everyone for coming. Thanks.